So today I watched a really old film, really old, um, and very historically relevant film. I've watched the so-called Great Dictator. So I suppose I actually watched Sacha Baron Cohen's movie first, which is obviously much more recent, which is quite different still. I mean, obviously, like he does. They're still similar though, so I'm assuming he is inspired by him. But yeah, I actually knew very little about Charlie Chaplin before watching this. I mean, I might have watched a few snippets long ago, but I don't really remember much at all. And it it befuddled me sometimes because I didn't think he was like this. I don't know. I suppose I sort of knew he did slapstick mainly as a form of comedy, which he does, and I got to admit it's not the stupid kind of slapstick. I don't know. I mean, kind of like um, those. I've commented on recently as well. They tend to be like the ones where they follow each other in cars and whatnot. That is such a low form of comedy. But this, on the other hand, I don't know. Somehow it was funny. It seemed funny. Yeah, it did. It did. But obviously, it's not just funny. There's something with it. There's quite something. Because of the historical context, of course. And I did keep thinking about, how the world was at the time. Based on everything I've read in the past and watched as well, in terms of other movies set in the time and about the time and after the time and documentaries and such. Obviously, it's its own thing. It's not. It's a strange sort of historical artifact, I suppose one might say, um, to set a comedy. I mean, it is comedic, but it's also social commentary essentially, and to it's difficult, shall we say? Uh, yeah, but somehow he didn't seem to fumble much at all in terms of what really should be sort of prioritized and such at any one moment. And the slapstick came about at almost the right time. Sometimes it just seems. I'm not sure how he did that because it's quite a sort of a delicate process to be able to accomplish that. Somehow he seemed to do it. Uh, yeah, I, I mean, it was still a sort of strange thing to see, obviously, because of everything and such. But somehow it did work. It really did, and somehow um, it's uh, it's it's so different from many other modern ones, and yet it's similar. Modern movies, this it's kind of similar somehow. Uh, you know, when he introduced the so-called kingdom of bacteria, that I don't know why. I couldn't figure it out immediately because it's not very obvious. And I know it ends in IA, and but yeah, I mean Italy doesn't end in IA either, but it's sort of I suppose it's etymologically Latin, I guess still, but it's anyway, yeah, they both of them though, yeah, had it's a strange sort of chemistry. And the food fight there was such a point of slapstick, but one almost wonders whether it could have really happened. I'm assuming so. It didn't. I don't think they really fought in real life. I don't think that's happened at all. But I'll read about this anyway if there's any reality to this film. But even if it's fictional, so it really worked well, and I think and everything that happened in terms of how the shares, like one of a really good moment, let's just say, is when they were in the barber shop and they just kept on going up and up in their chairs. I mean, that is the thing that he filmed that in 1940 is incredible. So yeah, while the real one was really going around trying to conquer countries, Charlie Chaplin and yeah, was going up in the chair, yeah, and playing with a ball of a world map that later exploded in his face. So if that was if it was a movie made after the war, one would say it's a metaphor for how the war ended, but this was pretty much before the war even began. It's incredible. I mean, it did kind of end like that, obviously. The amount of prescience, honestly, you know, was quite something. He was almost prescient. I mean, I don't know. So at that point, they had been in government for 7 years, I think. Um, but still, he seemed to mention some things. I don't know if it was just foresight or some things that had already happened, so it just extrapolated and such. But yeah, I didn't think I'd hear them in 1940. Because if it was made after, then sure, I suppose based on everything everyone knows. But that there were things that seemingly, from what I've gathered, weren't known until after the end of the war and everything was uncovered. So it's a bit incredible that in a comedic slapstick movie, not slapstick, even during the time that this was made, slapstick was so idiotic almost, right? This gives slapstick a whole new dimension to it, and yeah, I think this must have revolutionized slapstick in this sense. Then yeah, every other anything related to it that came after must have been influenced. Not so much with the social commentary bit, I suppose. I mean, pretty much all the slapstick I've ever watched since, and modern ones as well, I have been really devoid of such things. To be fair, there weren't many such instances in this movie. There were a couple, at least, really strong instances, when Hana looked into the camera and when he looked at the camera at the end. As it happens, I had already seen that scene before, somehow. I suppose its reputation preceded it, and it did sort of, and in both instances, I suppose, did sort of, but in the context of what it was, I think they were appropriate, I suppose one could say. I mean, they're still as far away from slapstick as one can be, but yeah, I can see what Chaplin was trying to do in here. I mean, now it'll be a bit difficult. I mean, I haven't actually seen any other movies of his. I think, at least if I've seen them, I forgot them. It's been a long time at any rate. So even if I watched them, I probably wouldn't remember them anyway that much. Maybe a few instances. But after watching this, maybe I should have begun. I guess I don't know with the others. It would be a bit difficult to. I mean, well, if all the slapstick is sort of similar, then I guess it'll still all be funny. But in terms of the context it was in and the plot and everything, it'll be difficult to match it, I suppose, because it is its own thing, and it's not, you know. I know there's one where he goes around with an orphan, I think, or such. So, well, anyway, we'll come to it and we'll come to those. And somehow they still seem to be appreciated more than 80 years later. Like, several of his movies are, on average, highly rated. And for once, I'm not going to say that, that being on average highly rated is a negative thing in a sense. I mean, some other movies I just don't know why they are at all. I just don't know. But in this case, sure. Don't know what the other movies of his are like, but this one specifically, yeah. I mean, it's quite something in terms of comedy, yeah. I guess one can only compare, comedies with other comedies in this sense. You cannot really compare different genres mostly. So that's what I try to do usually, because otherwise it's a bit oranges and apples scenario. But in terms of other comedies, there was what is it called? One Likes It Hot, I think. Yeah, and some people seem to think that it's one of the best, if not comedies, and yeah. I, I mean, it's not like I didn't like it, but I didn't absolutely like it so much. And I've seen better comedies. Obviously, I know in terms of Marilyn Monroe's life herself specifically, it was, I guess, a turning point for her. She didn't survive much long before that, after that, I think it is. But in terms of the movie itself, though, it was quite mild at best, I think, in my opinion. This, on the other hand, well, there's slapstick and social commentary, but uh, I don't know. It's as a comedy, though, it really works somehow. Yeah, I mean, I would have thought that it wouldn't. I thought it would be difficult, at the very least, but it wasn't. I mean, it really succeeded somehow. Yeah. So, yeah, in terms of the beginning, right? I mean, it was a war zone. Yet, I've honestly never seen a war depicted on screen which ended up being comedic. I don't think I just usually you get wars and comedy separately. You just don't get them at the same time, and somehow it worked, right? And somehow it sort of uh, uh, removed me from the theater of war and just indicated that it would possibly be a slapstick movie other than a seriously dramatic movie that begins with war, etc. I think the best scene in that phase was when they were upside down in the plane. I mean, that was so funny, right? Somehow they didn't realize that they were like that. Um, I mean, the other guy played by Reginald because he was presumably shaken, but when he regains consciousness due to the blood returning to his head. I mean, that's just so funny. And then the water going up and somehow not realizing why it's going up. Um, that is some good slapstick, right? I mean, much better than two cars chasing each other for some reason. I'm not sure why they think it's, or even people chasing each other generally. I mean, that's not funny, is it? It's just people chasing each other. Never mind. This is the problem I have with like for example the Saint Premium movies as well. They tend to be that sort of slapstick, not this sort. And wondering why water is going the other direction is just very funny. A very funny way to depict a comedic moment, I think, in my opinion, as opposed to to people. I mean, sure, when they were fighting with the food near them and such, that's more of a conventional sort of slapstick moment where I mean, I could see that happening in many other movies. But other than that, yeah, they were still quite sort of unique, I guess. Slapstick. It wasn't. I haven't seen many scenes in other movies like this. Uh, yeah, and I just read though that he thought in his autobiography that he wouldn't have made this movie if he knew the extent, that he knew after the war, somehow. But I wonder. I mean, because he made fun of him, and I think that is useful. Uh, you know, um, that's the one thing that these sort of personalities hate mostly. Being made fun of. Even with poetry and such, that's not so much making fun, but more about revealing the truth. And in a way, comedy can still sort of reveal the truth, couldn't it, I suppose? Also, the scene where they try to eat the pudding without getting a car, and the fact that the audience then realizes that what Hannah did. It was another funny one, I think, and maybe not as funny as the previously mentioned scene, with the airplane, but still it was. I mean, in terms of what he tried to do and how he tried to uh, get, hide it and how people's reaction were as well. Like there was only one person who admitted to having the coin. The fact that he kept eating and such. I mean, in a way, that is sort of like a traditional slapstick comedy. It's not really very unique, I sort of, I'm not sure, if I saw that anywhere else, but it doesn't seem to be that unique to Chaplin or such. I think that other sort of comedies do that sort of thing where things are eaten or such, or even in cartoons. I think it happens. Uh, but it was still sort of a funny thing. Well, maybe not laugh out loud funny, but in the context of it was what it was. Still interesting, I suppose. Another very funny scene as well, I think, is when Benzino was coming in, and the train kept going up and down, and they kept moving the carpet and such, and he'd rather stay in the train than go out to the carpet, despite the train being so jerky and such. I think this really satires this mindset that seems to think that somehow things need to be done in a certain way, and not even so. In this case, obviously, it would have been better to just go out of the train rather than go up and down. But you could see that happening because of this mindset. So you could see such a situation happening. So no one knows if it ever happened for real. It probably wouldn't say that it did if it did, but you could see it happening almost because it's one of those things. It's like if they think that they'd rather not go out on a red carpet than but yeah, and then when the steam came out and blew them over, that was another funny one. funny thing. And also the fact that the microphones at the beginning were bending was a comic sort of in, it it was, I mean, it wasn't, incredibly funny or anything, but it was sort of mildly funny, maybe, you know. You can almost imagine the microphones doing that if they were made of plasticine or something. And apparently he used Wagner's music at the points here. I didn't quite notice this myself while watching it, I got to admit. But yeah, apparently he used it when he was bouncing the globe around and along with the final speech. And apparently Chaplin intended it to be some sort of James like meaning to it. Um, yeah, so here Lutz Peter Kopnik mentions Adorno as well, and how how culture can represent two facets. So yeah, I suppose it's interesting. It's also weird, by the way, how somehow Nazis were supposed to have called Chaplin a Jew despite not being a Jew. It's very weird. Then again, people tend to use names and titles based on not much reason, I suppose. Didn't realize they were born 4 days apart. By the way, that's another bit of trivia I just learned. They were born on the same year, just 4 days apart. That's quite close. And so he was haunted by the possibility that he might have, instead of becoming a comic artist, um, hmm, uh, so it's obviously quite interesting to read about the background of this film. In a way, almost as much as watching it, considering the historical context within it. So apparently, it was started out. The filming started after Poland was invaded, but finished before France capitulated. So quite a lot of history there, quite a lot of coincidences and such. So I suppose Poland represented Austerlitz, I'm assuming. Yeah, Ost I think is east. So yeah, in a way, and it was interesting also how he used Esperanto for. I was wondering what those signs were at one point. I don't know the language myself, so I just googled one thought at one point, and yeah, I just realized it was Esperanto. So I suppose that's another meaning that wasn't as direct as the message at the end that he gave, since Esperanto was created to facilitate communication between many countries, many different countries it is, and so yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure if there are as many places where they use signs in Esperanto, but it's interesting that he used it for this film. So yeah, it is what it is, which is really, it's, you know, yeah, I mean, it was recognized even at the time, but only Oscar nominated, apparently, just apparently only one from his whole filmography as well. But otherwise, it seems to have been recognized quite a lot outside of that, and since then, I mean, uh, it's been quite a whole load of time. It's been 70, 80 years, hasn't it? Yeah, it's quite old, but it's uh, it's almost a revolutionary film, I guess. I mean, it's obviously contextual mostly, which is what it is, but also the fact that it had this um, well-made, effective comedy. I think it wasn't just very simplistic slapstick like most other movies even at the time had. It was effective and it integrated it. I think that's what's useful about not exactly useful, more like yeah, just well, integrating different elements within all sorts of movies is what really makes them work. I suppose one could say. I mean, especially this is a special. You have many genres, you know. So in this case, it's sort of combined war and comedy genre, sort of, you know. But it combined them well. That's the point. Some movies do not combine genres well, but the this one did at any rate. I mean, I'm not going to compare it with any other movies from any other genres that don't really have anything to do with either this context or this year or genre. It is what it is. And unfortunately, right now, for now, I cannot compare it to the others in his filmography either because I haven't seen them yet. But I would as soon as I have watched them. But yeah, otherwise, I do like what Chaplin seems to have done. He seems to have been an interesting character, really, and um, it's, this movie was interesting mostly. Somehow, though, I mean, I didn't expect it to find it very funny, but I think you could say one could say it exceeds expectations, possibly. Kind of like some like it hard didn't. I don't know why some people seem to think it's the funniest movie ever. I'm not sure if I missed something or maybe I wasn't in the right mood. Moods do matter, I suppose. But I didn't find some like it hard funny. I don't know what I thought. I found it. Maybe it was a bit funny, but not a lot. Not laugh out loud at least, and it's not exactly subtle comedy from what I remember. I think it's been years now, so. But yeah, so that's the one thing I can compare it to, I guess, since it's around the same era. Other than that, obviously, it's a bit useless, I think, to compare comedies from the more recent past. Like, there's no one I can compare it to the movie I watched yesterday, right? Which was a rom-com, right? I mean, obviously, comedies come in many different sort of sub-genres, one could say. Rom-coms have absolutely nothing to do with a war comedy. And I haven't actually watched many other. I don't think I've watched any other war comedies, to be honest. Um, I checked the category for specifically 1940s war comedies, and there's only like five others. So um, that year or decade is it? I'm not sure. There were many produced, so I'm not sure if there are many produced overall. So I suppose I'd be interested in watching more war comedies to see if there's anything similar. Yeah, I mean, it could potentially be, I suppose, more interesting than simply having war on its own. Uh, but I never thought that wars could also be comedic because obviously, I mean, if you have a real life war, it's never comedic, right? Pretty much never. I mean, there's the possibility of dark humor, maybe. And this is the thing, so even here, it wasn't as such dark humor that was used. I mean, it was slapstick, which is a sort of different thing. I suppose dark humor is more with regards to the linguistic potentialities more, you know. So I don't think it can refer to slapstick really. Slapstick is more of a neutral sort of humor, I suppose, rather than either optimistic or pessimistic as such. Um, but yeah, it's quite interesting how even the war genre can be comedic. And yeah, so I'll check out some others at some point in the future. I suppose it's sort of a new world for me. I really don't know what else there is, and if it's, I mean, this was made subtly, as I mentioned before. So it's various elements were mixed in at the right proportion and such. I'm assuming not every single war comedy is like that, though. I mean, some will inevitably trip over, I'm assuming. Because some things, I guess, couldn't really be comedic. But uh, the way that this movie seems to have done it is by separating them, you know, kind of like oil and water. So, you know, they just stay separated, and it's kind of what the movie did. I mean, it did combine them just a bit, but only just ever so slightly. Um, so otherwise, though, I think there is still a contributory factor for why the film is well received. So obviously, I don't know ultimately though how much of its historic recognition was due to Chaplin already being uh, known, and he already had many previous movies at that point. So obviously, people's perception would already be uh, in a different sort of mindset due to that. But otherwise, I'm thinking it is mainly due to the fact that it was released at such a time and the context and everything. Apparently, so it was the Three Stooges released a satire months previously. So it wasn't even the first satire about this topic specifically. I haven't seen this other one yet. Maybe I could. I'm not sure I've ever seen this Three Stooges before, actually. But yeah, otherwise, I will definitely watch the other Chaplin movies that remain, which is every single one of them, I suppose one would say. It's interesting sort of humor, I suppose. I mean, I didn't think that I'd ever really like slapstick. It's not my favorite type of comedy, but somehow it could possibly work. I don't know what his silent films are like. Maybe they're too slapsticky then if they're silent, but somehow he doesn't seem to use slapstick in a very overly ridiculous manner like many other movies do. Just like when they just run out after each other or something. I mean, that is the most ridiculous slapstick in my opinion. But that didn't happen here. I mean, well, there was a slight bit in when the and with the pan, banging, the pan banging on their heads and such. That's sort of a conventional, stereotypical slapstick, I suppose. But otherwise, I did like various bits, like when that cape gets entangled and such. Even though they're sort of blunt comedy, but it's still somehow entertaining. Just when every time he tried to get a pen and it got stuck. Yeah. Even though it was repeated, I mean, sure, after a while, I guess it sort of gets one gets used to it. But until then, at least, it's entertaining, I suppose. Even if it's the most, but it's a scenario where you just wonder whether it ever happened for real, because it could happen. So why not?